The viewport on the CSS Phoenix offered a deceptively serene view of Velox VII. From orbit, the planet was a swirl of ochre and deep purple, like an exotic marble suspended in the void. Lieutenant Mara Keene knew better. Class 9. Kill planets didn't earn their designation from aesthetics. "Beautiful, isn't it?" The voice startled her. She turned to find Dr. Sol Ricks adjusting his ocular implants, the mechanical irises contracting as they focused on her face. "If you enjoy looking at death wrapped in pretty colors," Mara replied, turning back to the viewport. Ricks chuckled, a sound like pebbles in a tumbler. "Your species has such a refreshing perspective." He moved closer, lowering his voice. "They don't appreciate it, you know. The view. Your perspective. Your humanity." Ricks's implants whirred as they adjusted again. "Commander Thrill especially. Be careful around him. He volunteered for this mission specifically because of your assignment." Mara had suspected as much. As the newest human observer assigned to the Concord survey fleet, she'd felt the chill from the moment she'd stepped aboard. The crystalline commander barely acknowledged her presence during briefings, addressing his remarks to the bulkhead above her head. "Thanks for the warning," Mara said, "but I've dealt with worse. 4 years in the Mars combat zone teaches you to recognize hostility before it's aimed at you." Ricks's expression, what passed for one on his partially synthetic face, darkened. "This isn't mere hostility, Lieutenant." I overheard. He stopped abruptly as a shadow fell across them. Commander Thrill's crystalline form refracted the corridor lights into prismatic shards across the viewport. At nearly 8 feet tall, he had to stoop slightly under the Phoenix's human-compatible ceilings. "Dr. Ricks." Thrill's voice resonated like a struck crystal. "Your presence is required in xenobiology. The preliminary scans show anomalous readings in the Eastern Hemisphere." "Of course, Commander." Ricks gave Mara a meaningful look before departing. Thrill remained his faceted head, turning fractionally toward Mara. "Lieutenant, you will attend the mission briefing in 30 minutes. Observation Bay 3. It wasn't a request. Mara nodded, military habit overriding her instinct to respond with sarcasm. "I'll be there, Commander." As Thrill moved away, the light fractals dancing off his body, Mara returned her gaze to the swirling death below. She'd applied for this observer position to escape the political quagmire that Mars had become, to see something of the galaxy humans had only recently been invited to join. Now, 2 cycles into humanity's participation in the Galactic Concord, she was beginning to understand why so few volunteered. The observation bay was crowded with the Phoenix's senior survey team when Mara arrived, a diverse collection of the Concord's founding species. Methane-breathing Haldarians huddled near their atmospheric vents. A pair of gelatinous Voral pulsed in their containment fields, communicating through color shifts too subtle for her unaugmented eyes. Commander Thrill stood at the center, his crystalline form dominating the space. Mara slipped into the back, noting the absence of Dr. Ricks. As the only other being who'd shown her basic courtesy, his missing presence felt significant. Velox VII presents unique challenges. Thrill began without preamble. Class 9 environment with atmospheric toxicity levels exceeding safety parameters for most conquered species. Gravity at 1.4 standard. Indigenous fauna categorized as extreme hazard across 94% of documented species. Holographic images materialized around him. Nightmarish creatures with natural armor, venom sacs, razor appendages. Mara recognized the briefing for what it was, a warning to stay aboard. Fine by her. She'd seen enough death on Mars to last a lifetime. "Primary survey will deploy auto-drones to the southern continent," Thrill continued. "Secondary teams will monitor from orbital position." The commander's faceted gaze swept the room, deliberately passing over Mara. "One exception. The human observer will undergo solo adaptability testing. Shuttle deployment at 600 ship time." Mara stiffened. Solo deployment. That hadn't been in her briefing package. Before she could voice an objection, A Haldarian officer whispered something that made Thrill's crystalline structure momentarily shimmer, their equivalent of amusement. Shuttle 3 will be prepared, Thrill added. 30-day deployment. Data collection protocols have been uploaded to your station, Lieutenant. The way he emphasized her rank made it sound like an insult. Mara pushed off from the wall she'd been leaning against. Commander, with respect, my assignment was observational. I'm not equipped for solo fieldwork on a Class 9. Thrill's structure stiffened, refracting light in sharp, aggressive patterns. Your species claimed extraordinary adaptability during Concorded mission hearings. The Council approved this test specifically to evaluate those claims. Lies. Mara had read the mission parameters backward and forward. There had been no mention of human field testing. But challenging Thrill directly would only cement whatever plan was forming behind those crystal facets. I'll need proper equipment, she said instead. Full atmospheric protection weapons, emergency beacon. All standard provisions will be supplied. Thrill cut her off. Report to Shuttle Bay 3 at 0545 for final preparations. His tone indicated the discussion was over. As the briefing dispersed, Mara caught fragments of conversation from a cluster of officers near the door. Jettisoning problem solved. Data will be fascinating regardless of outcome. 30 days, excessive 20 would suffice for cellular breakdown. Cold realization spread through her chest. This wasn't a test, it was an execution. The night cycle passed in a blur of preparation and barely controlled panic. Mara downloaded everything the Phoenix's database contained about Velox 7 to her personal device. She memorized toxic zones, studied the hunting patterns of the largest predators, plotted potential shelter locations based on topographical scans. None of it seemed sufficient against what awaited her. At 0530, she reported to the shuttle bay outwardly calm. If they wanted to see her break, they'd be disappointed. 8 generations of Keens had served in one military or another. She wouldn't be the first to die on duty, just the first to do it on an alien world. The equipment officer, a 4-armed Tekkan with mottled blue skin, handed her a sealed environment suit without meeting her eyes. Mara inspected it with growing concern. Standard issue, but with suspicious modifications to the life support modules. These have been tampered with, she said flatly. The Tekkan's skin flushed deeper blue. Adjusted for Velox 7's atmospheric composition. Commander's orders. Mara bit back a retort. Arguing now would change nothing. Instead, she focused on what she could control. While the officer turned to retrieve her pack, she quickly accessed the suit's subsystems, noting the sabotaged component's life support, limited to 12 hours communications, disabled locator beacon inactive. As expected. They didn't want her coming back. The shuttle was small, designed for brief surface excursions. No pilot, it would fly automated patterns. Mara settled into the single acceleration couch, mind racing through scenarios each more desperate than the last. As the bay doors opened and the shuttle detached from the Phoenix, Mara caught a glimpse of Dr. Ricks, watching from an observation window, his expression unreadable. Then there was only the void, and below it the swirling death of Velox the 7th. The descent was rougher than standard protocols allowed. Either the shuttle's inertial dampeners were malfunctioning, or this too was deliberate, soften her up before arrival. Mara grit her teeth against the G-forces, focusing on the rapidly approaching surface. The touchdown jarred her spine. Before she could unfasten her restraints, the shuttle's airlock cycled open with a hiss of equalizing pressure. A wave of acrid air washed over her despite the suit's seals, another adjustment. Exit the vehicle and proceed 100 meters north to the designated survey point, the shuttle's automated voice instructed. Mara hesitated, then stepped toward the open airlock. The moment she crossed the threshold, the door slammed shut behind her with such force that she stumbled down the exit ramp. The suit's external sensors screamed warnings, atmospheric toxins exceeding filtration capacity, radiation levels, borderline lethal temperature fluctuations extreme. A familiar voice crackled through her helmet, startling her. Commander Thrill patched directly into her suit systems. Test subject deployed. Survival probability calculations have been initiated. Do not attempt return for 30 days. The shuttle is programmed to reject unauthorized entry. The shuttle's engines roared to life behind her. Mara spun around, watching, as her only means of escape lifted into the purplish-green sky. "Why?" she demanded, knowing Thrill could still hear her. "What does this accomplish?" "Data," came the dispassionate reply. "Your species claims to be exceptional. Now prove it, or don't. Either outcome will be instructive." The communication cut off. In the same moment, Mara felt a series of small detonations around her torso, the suit's support modules self-destructing. The helmet's display flickered and died, leaving only the transparent faceplate between her and Velox 7's toxic atmosphere. The final insult came seconds later. The suit began to dissolve, an auto-destruct feature she hadn't detected. Within minutes, she stood naked on the obsidian plain, the caustic air burning her exposed skin, the planet's excessive gravity already straining her muscles. In the distance, a roar shook the flats, vibrating through the glassy surface beneath her feet. Something large was moving toward the disturbance of the shuttle's landing. Mara Keen, Lieutenant Combat Veteran Human Observer, was now simply prey. She ran. The obsidian plains offered no cover, no shelter, nothing but reflective darkness stretching to a horizon distorted by heat and toxic vapors. Mara's lungs burned with each breath, but the air, while caustic, wasn't immediately lethal. Small mercy. Her bare feet left bloody prints on the sharp-edged surface as she forced herself forward. The distant roar came again, closer now. Mara changed direction, heading toward a series of jagged formations that broke the flat expanse. Her military training took over, cataloging priorities, shelter, water weapons in that order. Without them, she'd be dead long before Thrill's 30 days elapsed. The formations turned out to be the collapsed remains of ancient lava tubes, their glassy interiors offering some protection from the winds that had begun to gust across the plains, carrying stinging particles that raised welts on her skin. Mara scrambled into the largest opening, a horizontal shaft, about 4 feet in diameter. Inside, the air was marginally better, still toxic, but less concentrated. The reduced gravity strain was immediately noticeable. Mara crawled deeper, using the faint purple light that filtered through the translucent obsidian to guide her. After perhaps 30 meters, the tube widened into a chamber where a portion of the ceiling had collapsed, allowing direct light, but also exposing it to the elements. Not ideal, but defensible. More importantly, the collapse had created a depression where a small pool of liquid had collected, not water, but something similar enough that her parched body responded with desperate craving. Mara approached cautiously, dipping a finger into the purplish fluid. It stung, but didn't seem to cause immediate damage. She scooped a tiny amount onto her tongue. Bitter, metallic, but not poisonous to the touch. Her survival training on Mars had included emergency filtration techniques. Using strips torn from what remained of her suit, she created a crude filter, purifying enough of the liquid to slake her immediate thirst. Next, inventory. The suit's main systems were destroyed, but smaller components remained intact: a wrist computer with downloaded planet data, though no communication capabilities. A utility knife that had been in a side pocket. The fabric itself, which could be repurposed. Not much against a planet designed to kill, but better than nothing. As night fell, a deeper darkness, rather than a true sunset, the temperature plummeted. Mara huddled in the innermost section of the tube, wrapping herself in suit fabric. Sleep came in fitful bursts, interrupted by distant howls, and twice by skittering sounds at the tube's entrance. Smaller predators, thankfully deterred by improvised noise traps she'd set using loose obsidian fragments. Dawn brought new challenges. A swarm of what she would later name shiv crickets, insectoid creatures with razor-sharp spines, found their way into her shelter. Mara fought them off with a makeshift obsidian blade, suffering dozens of cuts, but killing enough to discourage the rest. She collected their corpses. Protein was protein regardless of its form. By the third day, She had established a routine: morning and evening forays to collect the purple liquid and hunt small creatures that emerged during twilight hours. Midday and night spent in the tube improving her shelter and crafting crude tools. She discovered that certain crystalline formations, when broken in specific ways, could hold an edge sharper than any manufactured blade. The larger predators remained a distant threat, their roars echoing across the plains, but never approaching her hiding place. Until the seventh day. Mara was returning from a foraging run when she heard it, a huffing, guttural breathing that raised the hair on her neck. Moving with the careful precision that had kept her alive in combat, she pressed herself against an outcropping of obsidian and peered around the edge. The creature was massive, easily twice her size, with a body structure unlike anything in the Phoenix's database. 6 powerful limbs supported a torso covered in natural armor plates that shifted like overlapping scales. Its head was a nightmare of sensory organs, no visible eyes, but multiple protrusions that twitched and turned, sampling the air. Most alarming were its forelimbs, each ending in retractable claws that left deep scores in the obsidian as it moved. Mara recognized it immediately from the mission briefing. X Delta classification, apex predator territory, dominant, hyper-aggressive. Exactly the sort of monster the survey team had gleefully described while looking everywhere but at her. She froze, willing her heart to quiet, her breathing to still. The creature paused, its head swiveling in her direction. One wrong move and she was dead. Then she noticed something else. The predator was favoring its right side, where a deep gash exposed musculature beneath the armored plates. Fresh blood, dark and viscous, seeped from the wound. It had been in a fight, and recently. Mara's shelter was no longer safe. The injured predator was seeking a defensible place to recover, and her lava tube was ideal. If she ran, it would chase her down on the open plain. If she fought, she'd die even faster. A third option formed in her mind, desperate, probably suicidal, but marginally better than certain death. During her preparations the night before departure, she'd sequestered several items inside her body cavities, places the tech and equipment officer wouldn't search. Among them, a small packet of medical nanites, standard issue for human-conquered personnel. The packet was now hidden in her improvised shelter. If she could reach it before the predator entered the tube. The decision was made for her when another roar shattered the air, a second predator, likely the one responsible for the first's injuries. The wounded creature snarled and charged toward the lava tube directly at Mara's position. She dove aside at the last moment, feeling the rush of air as massive claws swept through the space she'd occupied. The predator barreled past, squeezing its bulk into the tube entrance. Mara scrambled after it, staying just out of reach of its rear limbs. If she could get past it to her shelter before it turned around. The gamble paid off. The predator was focused on the approaching threat, outside, positioning itself in the tube's entrance, its massive body effectively blocking the way. Mara slipped past, racing to the chamber where her few possessions were hidden. She retrieved the nanite packet with trembling hands. The medical technology was designed for human physiology, but the basic functions, tissue repair, infection prevention, might work on the alien predator. Or they might kill it instantly. Either way, she was dead if she did nothing. The sounds of combat erupted from the tube entrance. Roars, the crack of obsidian breaking, the wet impact of claws, finding flesh. Mara crept forward, nanite packet clutched in one hand, obsidian blade in the other. She reached the curve in the tube that gave her a view of the entrance. The wounded predator, her predator, she thought with grim humor, was holding its ground against a slightly smaller but uninjured attacker. Blood from both creatures spattered the obsidian walls, but it was clear her predator was losing its movements, growing sluggish as its wound continued to bleed. Mara made her decision. Darting forward during a lull in the fighting, she pressed the nanite packet against the exposed flesh of the wounded predator's side and activated it. The microscopic machines flowed into the wound like quicksilver. The effect was immediate and violent. The predator bellowed, its body convulsing, as the nanites infiltrated its system. It whipped around, nearly decapitating Mara with a reflexive swipe. She fell backward, scrambling away from those lethal claws. But instead of pursuing her, the predator turned its rage on the attacker, lunging forward with renewed strength. The fight was brief and savage. When it ended, the attacking predator lay dead, its neck crushed between powerful jaws. Mara pressed herself against the far wall of the tube obsidian blade, raised in a futile gesture of defense, as her predator turned toward her. Blood dripped from its maw as it approached each step, deliberate, predatory. It stopped less than a meter away, lowering its head to her level. A sound emerged from it, not a roar, but a low, rumbling vibration that she felt in her bones. The sensory organs on its head extended toward her, twitching as they sampled her scent, her heat, perhaps even her fear. Mara remained perfectly still, blade steady despite her terror. She'd seen death approaching too many times to flinch now. The predator's next move defied everything she knew about apex hunters. It lowered itself to the ground, exposing the wounded flank, where the nanites were visibly at work, knitting together the damaged tissue. The message was unmistakable, almost absurdly so. "Thank you." Mara stared in disbelief. Then, moving with exquisite caution, she extended her hand toward the wound, checking the nanite's progress. The predator remained still, only a slight tensing of its massive muscles, indicating its awareness of her touch. "Well," Mara said, her voice rough from disuse, "I guess we have a truce." The predator made that rumbling sound again. Up close, with adrenaline no longer flooding her system, Mara could see its features more clearly. Despite its fearsome appearance, there was intelligence in the way it positioned itself, in how it assessed her movements. "You need a name," she continued, the absurdity of the situation striking her. Here she was naked on an alien world, making conversation with a monster that could tear her apart without effort. "Something ironic. How about Pup?" The newly christened pup shifted, settling more comfortably on the obsidian floor. Its wound was already half closed, the nanite's work far more efficient in its alien biology than they would have been in hers. Mara leaned back against the wall, exhaustion suddenly overwhelming her. "Don't eat me while I sleep," she murmured, eyes already closing. "That would be poor manners after I saved your life." She woke hours later, disoriented in the perpetual purple twilight of the lava tube. For a moment, she thought the encounter had been a dream, a hallucination brought on by Velox VII's toxic atmosphere. Then, she registered the massive form curled at the entrance to her chamber. Pup was still there, its breathing deep and regular in sleep. More surprisingly, a fresh corpse lay nearby, one of the smaller herbivores she'd been hunting for sustenance, its neck cleanly broken. "Bringing me breakfast," Mara whispered. "Aren't you domesticated already?" Pup's sensory appendages twitched at the sound of her voice, but it didn't wake. Mara took the opportunity to examine her unlikely ally more thoroughly. In the better light of day, she could see patterns in its armor plates, not random, but symmetrical designs that might be naturally occurring or might indicate something more. Genetic engineering, evolutionary artistry. Either way, Pup was not simply a brute force predator. There was complexity here that the Concord database had failed to capture. Over the next 3 days, a tentative routine emerged. Pup would leave the tube at dawn, returning hours later with killed prey. Mara, in turn, showed it where she had found the purple liquid, which Pup lapped up gratefully. The nanites had fully healed its wound, but seemed to have established a symbiotic relationship rather than dissolving, as they would have in human tissue. Communication developed organically. Mara began using simple sound patterns, 2 clicks for danger, a low whistle for food, a higher one for water. To her amazement, Pup began mimicking these, adding its own variations. When it wanted her to follow, it would make a soft, huffing sound and wait expectantly. On the 10th day, Pup led her deeper into the lava tube system than she'd dared explore alone. The passages wound downward the obsidian, giving way to other materials, some crystalline, others oddly organic. The air grew warmer, yet less caustic. They emerged into a vast underground chamber where glowing fungal growths provided blue-green illumination. In the center, a pool of clear liquid steamed gently, actual water, heated geothermally, but pure enough to be safely consumed. Mara nearly wept at the sight. "You've been holding out on me," she told Pup, who watched with evident satisfaction as she bathed for the first time since her arrival on Velox the Seventh. The chamber became their new base, infinitely more hospitable than the upper tube. Mara constructed a more substantial shelter, using materials gathered from around the cavern. Pup dragged in large kills, seeming to understand her need for regular food. In return, she used her knowledge to identify which of the glowing fungi were nutritious and which were toxic, a distinction Pup couldn't make with its non-visual senses. It was during this period of relative security that Mara's thoughts turned from mere survival to escape and retribution. The risk computer had survived her ordeal, and while it couldn't communicate with the Phoenix, it contained valuable data, including the ship's orbital pattern and the automated protocols for shuttle retrieval. "They'll come back," she explained to Pup one evening, sketching plans in the dust of the cavern floor. "Eventually, they'll send a shuttle to confirm my death and collect any remaining data. That's our chance." Pup made a sound she'd come to recognize as agreement, though she harbored no illusions that it truly understood her words. Still, its intelligence was undeniable. It had begun arranging killed prey in specific patterns, communicating through placement which creatures were safe to eat and which contained toxins. On the 15th day, while exploring a branching passage from their cavern, they discovered a vein of metallic ore embedded in the rock. Mara recognized it from her briefing materials, a rare conductive element the Concord valued highly. More importantly, it could be used to boost a signal. Over the next 5 days, Mara scavenged parts from her deteriorating risk computer and the remains of her suit. Combined with the conductive ore and power cells she'd carefully preserved, she created a jury-rigged distress beacon. It wouldn't reach orbit, not powerful enough, but if she could place it at the highest point of the lava tube system, it might be detected by the survey drones that regularly swept the surface. "One shot," she told Pup as they climbed toward the surface. "The power draw will fry its circuits, but if it works, if they send a retrieval team..." She left the thought unfinished. Pup didn't need to understand the specifics of her plan, only that they would hunt together again, this time with Thrill and his crew as prey. The beacon's activation was anticlimactic. A brief pulse of energy, a flicker of lights, then silence. Mara had no way of knowing if the signal had been detected. All she could do was prepare, assuming success. "We need to choose our ground carefully," she explained to Pup as they descended again. "If they come, they'll be armed, expecting only to find a corpse. We need surprise and chaos." Using scavenged materials and her growing knowledge of Velox the Seven's natural resources, Mara constructed crude but effective weapons: obsidian blades, poison-tipped spears, and most promisingly improvised EMP grenades that might disable the drones that would inevitably accompany any retrieval team. Pup, meanwhile, seemed to grasp the concept of ambush intuitively. It led Mara to ideal hiding spots near the beacon's location areas, where rock formations would provide cover while allowing quick movement. More impressively, it began bringing her recording small, crystalline formations that, when broken in a specific way, released sounds they had absorbed. Mara collected these particularly, those containing the distress calls of juvenile predators, which she had observed caused significant agitation among Velox the Seven's fauna. 26 days into her ordeal, the plan bore fruit. Mara's makeshift perimeter alarm, thin strands of conductive material stretched across likely approach vectors, signaled movement from the south. Ascending to a ventilation opening in the lava tube, she observed a Concord shuttle touching down approximately 2 kilometers from their position. Standard retrieval protocol, she noted with grim satisfaction. Land at a safe distance, send drones ahead to ensure no threats, then approach on foot with minimal personnel. Predictable, exploitable. "Showtime," she whispered to Pup, who tensed beside her, sensing her shift in demeanor. The retrieval team followed procedure to the letter. 2 combat drones swept the landing zone, followed by 2 officers in full environmental suits. Even at this distance, Mara recognized Commander Thrill's crystalline form, distinctive even in protective gear. The second officer was the Tekken who had issued her sabotage suit. Perfect. Mara and Pup retreated to their prepared positions. The plan was simple but required precise timing. When the team approached the beacon, she would trigger the EMP grenades, disabling the drones. Simultaneously, the recorded distress calls would send the local wildlife into a frenzy, creating chaos and confusion. In that moment, Pup would cut off their retreat while Mara confronted Thrill directly. As the retrieval team discovered the beacon and began scanning for remains, Mara gave Pup the signal. They had practiced 3 sharp clicks, followed by a low whistle. Pup disappeared into a side passage, circling around to approach from behind the survey team. Mara activated the first EMP grenade, tossing it directly into the path of the lead drone. The device detonated with a satisfying crackle of energy. The drone dropped immediately, its systems fried. The second drone swiveled, weapon systems activating, but Mara was already rolling to a new position, triggering the crystalline recordings as she moved. The effect was instantaneous. Juvenile predator calls echoed across the obsidian plains, amplified by the natural acoustics of the rock formations. From every direction came answering calls, territorial challenges, hunting cries, warning signals. The Tekken officer visibly panicked, his forearms flailing, as he spun around trying to locate the sources of the sounds. Thrill maintained more composure, his crystalline structure rigid with tension, but still controlled. He barked orders at the remaining drone, directing it toward Mara's position. The second EMP took care of that threat, leaving only the officers. Now came the critical moment, Pup's charge. It happened so quickly that even Mara, who was expecting it, was startled by Pup's explosive entry. One moment the passage behind the officers was empty. The next, Pup's massive form filled it, effectively cutting off their retreat to the shuttle. The Tekken officer screamed, a high-pitched sound that only agitated Pup further. Thrill raised his weapon, a standard Concord pulse rifle, but Pup was faster, knocking it from his grasp with a precise strike. The commander staggered back, his crystalline body emitting sharp, discordant sounds of distress. That was Mara's cue. She stepped into view, obsidian spear in hand, body painted with the glowing fungi from the cavern for maximum psychological impact. She knew what she must look like: a ghost, a demon, something feral and uncivilized, exactly what Thrill expected humans to be. "Surprised to see me, Commander." Her voice was rough from disuse, but the effect was appropriate. "Your test subject survived. Data point recorded." Thrill's faceted head turned toward her, refracting light in patterns that indicated extreme shock. "Impossible. No unaugmented species could survive Velox 7's environment for this duration. Yet, here I stand." Mara moved closer, spear leveled at the commander's midsection, where his critical systems were housed. "And I'm not alone." As if on cue, Pup released a full-throated roar that shook loose obsidian fragments from the tunnel ceiling. The Tekken officer collapsed, either fainting or engaging some self-protective shutdown. "You abandoned me to die," Mara continued, circling Thrill while maintaining her distance. "Left me without protection, without resources. Sabotaged my equipment. Why? What threat does humanity pose to the mighty Concord?" Thrill's structure vibrated, generating harmonic tones that translated roughly as laughter. "Threat. You overestimate your significance, Lieutenant. This was merely data collection. Your species claims extraordinary resilience and adaptability as justification for Concord membership. The Council requires verification. Verification doesn't require attempted murder. Morality is irrelevant to scientific inquiry," Thrill responded. "Your survival against probability is noted. A fascinating aberration. Mara's grip tightened on her spear. Is the Concord aware of your methods, Commander? Or is this your personal research project? A pause. Thrill's crystalline surface clouded momentarily guilt, if she had to guess. The Council authorized extreme testing protocols. The specific implementation was left to mission commanders. Convenient. Mara glanced at Pup, who waited with predatory patience, understanding that this was her kill, not his. Here's what happens now. You're taking us back to the Phoenix, both of us. The Predator. Thrill's structure shimmered with what might have been disbelief. That is not protocol. It is an unclassified dangerous organism. He's my companion, Mara corrected. And he's coming with me. Consider it part of your data collection cross-species cooperation in extreme environments. Thrill seemed to calculate his options, facets shifting as his crystalline mind processed scenarios. The creature cannot be accommodated on the shuttle. Its mass exceeds— Make room, Mara interrupted. Or stay here while we take the shuttle ourselves. I've learned enough about conquered systems to fly it without you. Another pause, longer this time. Finally, Thrill's structure settled into a configuration Mara recognized as resignation. Very well. The shuttle can be reconfigured, but the Council will not permit an apex predator aboard the Phoenix without containment protocols. Mara smiled, though there was no warmth in it. Let me worry about the Council, Commander. You just worry about getting us there alive. The journey back to the Phoenix was tense. The shuttle designed for a small survey team was cramped with Pup's massive form, occupying most of the cargo area. The Tekken officer had regained consciousness, but remained huddled in a corner, all four arms, wrapped protectively around his torso, eyes, fixed on Pup with undisguised terror. Thrill piloted in silence his crystalline structure, occasionally emitting sharp tones that Mara interpreted as distress or anger. She kept her obsidian blade close, though she doubted Thrill would attempt anything with Pup watching his every move. What will you tell the Council? Thrill finally asked, as they approached the Phoenix. The truth, Mara replied. I'm going to broadcast every moment of this experience, the sabotage, the abandonment, the betrayal. And then I'm going to show them what real adaptation looks like. She placed a hand on Pup's armored flank. The Predator rumbled contentedly, sensory appendages extending briefly to touch her bare skin. The bond between them was visible, undeniable, and completely contrary to conquered expectations of primitive human behavior. They will not believe you, Thrill said. It is your word against a senior commander's. Mara tapped her wrist where the computer had been. Not quite. I've been recording since the moment you dropped me on that rock. The nanites I used to heal Pup dual purpose. They've been collecting data, storing it in crystalline structures, similar to your own biology. Everything is documented, Commander. This was partially a bluff, but one based on enough truth to be convincing. The nanites had indeed formed unusual structures in Pup's healed tissue, though Mara had only theories about their data storage capabilities. But Thrill, with his limited understanding of human technology, wouldn't know that. The commander's structure clouded again, his equivalent of paling. You would destroy my career over a scientific protocol. You tried to destroy my life, Mara countered. Consider this data collection on the human concept of justice. The shuttle docked with the Phoenix amid chaos. Alarms blared as the unauthorized return was detected. Security teams mobilized. Through the viewport, Mara could see Dr. Ricks gesturing urgently to other officers, pointing at the shuttle's external cameras, which showed her filthy feral alive, and beside her Pup's massive form. Open the airlock, she ordered Thrill, and announce our arrival, all channels. Reluctantly, the commander complied. His crystalline voice resonated through the Phoenix's communication system. Attention all personnel. Retrieval shuttle returning with Lieutenant Keene, and indigenous specimen. Clear docking bay of non-essential personnel. Mara smiled grimly. Nice try, but Pup and I are making a proper entrance. She reached past Thrill, activating the ship-wide visual feed. Every screen on the Phoenix would now show what the shuttle's internal cameras captured. This is Lieutenant Mara Keene, Human Observer, reporting on Concord research protocols. She began staring directly into the camera. I was abandoned on Velox the 7 26 days ago, in a deliberate attempt to cause my death under the guise of adaptability testing. My equipment was sabotaged, my communications disabled. What follows is documentation of that betrayal and my subsequent survival with the assistance of an indigenous life form I've designated Pup. She nodded to Pup, who seemed to understand the significance of the moment. The Predator rose to its full height, dwarfing everyone in the shuttle, and emitted a controlled roar that would be heard throughout the Phoenix. "We're coming aboard," Mara continued. "Anyone who attempts to separate us or to harm either of us will face consequences. Dr. Ricks, if you're listening, I request your presence in the docking bay as a scientific witness to cross-species cooperation. Everyone else stay back." When the airlock finally opened, they were met by a semicircle of security personnel, weapons raised but held at uncertain angles. Beyond them stood Dr. Rick's ocular implants, whirring rapidly as they processed the sight before him. "Fascinating," the doctor breathed. "Lieutenant, you've accomplished something unprecedented." "Save the accolades," Mara said, stepping forward with Pup close behind. "I need access to the communication array. The Galactic Council needs to see this." What followed was a bureaucratic and political earthquake that shook the Concord to its foundations. Mara's broadcast reached not only the Council, but virtually every member species with access to Concord channels. The footage heard desperate survival, the bond with Pup, the callous abandonment, generated immediate and intense reaction. Within hours, the Phoenix was ordered to return to Concord Central, the massive space station that served as the Alliance's headquarters. Commander Thrill and several other officers were placed under immediate investigation. Dr. Ricks, who came forward with his own documentation of the plan, was granted whistleblower protection. 3 weeks later, Mara stood before the full Galactic Council, 38 representatives of the Concord's member species, arranged in a semicircle of environmental chambers, tailored to their diverse biologies. Pup remained at her side, now fitted with a specialized translation collar, developed by Dr. Ricks, that allowed the Predator to communicate simple concepts through synthesized speech. The Council's judgment was unexpectedly reasonable. While officially condemning the unsanctioned extremity of the Phoenix's testing protocols, they acknowledged the valuable data that had emerged from the incident. Mara's demonstration of cross-species cooperation with a previously classified, unbondable predator had opened new avenues of research and diplomatic possibility. Lieutenant Keene, the Haldarian Council President, announced methane bubbling through his speech apparatus. "In recognition of your exceptional service and unique abilities, the Council appoints you to the newly created position of Cross-Species Integration Specialist. Your first assignment will be to document and develop your communication techniques with the Velox 7 predator species." Mara inclined her head, accepting the role with outward grace, while inwardly noting the political maneuvering. They were simultaneously honoring her and containing the potential damage her experience could cause to Concord human relations. Clever. "And what of Pup?" she asked, resting a hand on the Predator's armored flank. "He's not a research subject. He's a sentient being who saved my life." The council chamber filled with the overlapping sounds of multiple species, communicating simultaneously, the equivalent of murmured consultation. Finally, the president spoke again. "The entity designated Pup is granted provisional companion status with permanent disposition, to be determined following comprehensive cognitive assessment." A pause, then more softly. "This is unprecedented, Lieutenant. We ask for your patience as our legal frameworks catch up to your discovery." It was more than Mara had expected. As the session concluded, she and Pup were escorted to newly assigned quarters aboard Concord Central, spacious accommodations modified to suit both human and Velox 7 environmental needs. Dr. Ricks visited that evening, bringing news that Commander Thrill had been removed from active service, pending a full investigation of all his research protocols. "You've changed things," Rick said, ocular implants focusing on Pup, who was curled on a specially constructed resting platform. The Concorde moved slowly, but this has accelerated certain conversations about humanity's place among us. Good, Mara replied. Though that wasn't my intention. I just wanted to survive. Perhaps that is the lesson, Rick suggested. That survival, true survival, comes not from superior strength or technology, but from the ability to forge unlikely bonds. After the doctor left, Mara sat beside Pup, running her fingers along the intricate patterns of its armor. The predator made the rumbling sound she'd come to recognize as contentment. We showed them, didn't we? She whispered. Man and monster united. Pup's translation collar activated, synthesizing its response. No monsters. Only different hunters. Mara smiled. Perhaps that was wisdom enough for one lifetime, the recognition that the greatest predator and the most vulnerable prey might, under the right circumstances, become something new together. Something neither the conquered nor humanity had imagined possible. As the station's night cycle began dimming the lights to accommodate the circadian rhythms of its diverse inhabitants, Mara Keene, Lieutenant Survivor, cross-species, integration specialist, fell asleep, with her hand resting on the warm flank of an apex predator who followed her like a pup. And somewhere in the vast bureaucracy of the Galactic Concord, a new classification was being created for Velox VII, no longer simply a kill planet, but the birthplace of an unexpected alliance that would change the course of interspecies relations forever.